are worth more than precious gold.
People are usually willing to do anything when it comes to make money. Well, I mean, of course we have to realize our dreams. We have to make our dreams come true. There have been some people that have dreamed of being musicians. There have been people who had dreamed of making it big in Hollywood. But what if I told you that there were two people, he wanted to be a pop star, and she wanted to be an actress, which both of them intertwined their talents, but not for the things you think they did. They actually started a cult, and it was a very moral cult with a lot of exploitation and horrible things that happen to people. And interestingly enough, this cult has left behind of them pieces of art that to this day are still being worn by celebrities. And yeah, I mean, that's sort of the introduction, so let me introduce myself before moving on.
Salute nomás.
Oh hi, I'm Devan Slaughter, and I'm your favorite rock star. And this is the only channel here on YouTube that is produced by someone who was abducted by a vampire marmot. And remember that I can be your Fiverr editor, so link below. Now, before moving on, I just need to give out a trigger warning because this tale gets immoral and it contains exploitation, child non-consensual relations, and it also contains mistreatment or domestic battery and domestic things not so good. So if those things sound bad to you, you can definitely skip this video because again, this is a very horrible history. And just subscribe please, because we are lacking subscribers. So thank you, that's all. We can go back to the history now. Before moving any further into this strange history, let me introduce you to the two characters of this history. First, we have Tony Alamo, who before marrying Susan, he was Bernie Lazar Hoffman, and she was Edith Opal Horn, both of them part of the Jewish community, both of them who had previous marriages before finding each other. Susan, during her early years, learned to read by reading the Bible. Unfortunately, her father contracted tuberculosis, and she read something in the Bible that was sort of "Faith can move mountains." This was stuck with Susan for part of her childhood, and even knowing her constant praying and her faith wasn't able to cure her father, this didn't derail her from her beliefs. When she grew up, she decided that the small town just wasn't for her. She wanted to pursue something grander, some bigger purpose in life, one might say. So she decided to move out from her small town to California. Very sooner than later, she realized that making it big in Hollywood, it's like basically catching a unicorn. It's like 1 in a million. So obviously it's very impossible for majority of normal people like me, you, I guess, to make it big in Hollywood. In any case, she started taking very odd jobs, and the job that we can recall for these events is when she was a b-girl at a bar. Now, if you don't know what a b-girl is basically someone who looks pretty at a bar, and then you walk into the bar, and you're like, oh my god, she's so pretty, I want to pay for her drinks, so you're paying for the drinks of the staff, basically. So yeah, it's sort of a marketing strategy, very strange, but that was a job. I think it is still a job to today. I'm not entirely sure, but in any case, that was her job when she met a debt collector. Now, this debt collector was a debt collector for the mafia. He doesn't come in hand a lot of times in this tale, but what does come in hand in this tale is that they too had a child named Christian, a girl named Chris. Well, she goes by the name Chris now, so it's Chris. Now Kris, who was her daughter, was severely mistreated by Susan. In many times she threatened her own daughter, saying to her that she was going to go to hell. Why? Because she was behaving badly or immorally in the eyes of Susan. Now let's remember that Susan, even knowing she was a believer, it's not like she was on the good side of the believers. It's like those sort of believers that are like, oh, gays are going to hell. Instead of being like, oh, I'm a good person, it's like, no, everybody's going to hell because I say so. Not because Jesus said so, because I say so. In any case, her daughter had a lot of instances where she was severely mistreated by the hands of Susan. There was an instant when Susan was trying to date someone who she thought he was going to be her breakthrough in the industry. So when he dumped her, she decided to take all of her anger and frustration on her daughter. And it was a very unfortunate day for Kris. She was severely beaten by her own mother to the point where she had to be hospitalized. And when she was at the hospital, Susan convinced her to do not say anything to the staff. Why? Because they were going to be separated and they were going to send her to a psychiatric ward. So the manipulations of Susan were continuous throughout all of Kris's life. And she was a very good liar and a very good manipulator. So, before moving on to the second part of the history, now let's go to Tony. Tony, on the other hand, he was a con artist. He was faking his ways in fame, basically, saying that he was a manager, that he was a producer, that he worked for people like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Doors. So basically like an incredible portfolio. So a lot of people who were newcoming artists were naive enough to believe in his lies. And I mean, it was Hollywood, so it was sort of a good place to run these sort of scams or cons, if you would like. In any case, he was able to make a living basically out of scamming people, pretending to be a manager when in reality he didn't have the knowledge nor the credentials to be one. One day, Susan came up to him and she was like, oh, would you like to go to my apartment to pray? And, well, I can surely state that they did go to the apartment, but it wasn't for praying.
You're the best big brother I could have ever asked for.
Now, Tony himself claimed that he was different from all of the other Christian preachers because he, even knowing was born a Jew, he was reborn a Christian, and this happened in 1955. And also, an interesting fact is that in 1966 is when he married Susan. After getting out of jail, of course, because, yeah, I told you that this was sort of a very strange tale, but in any case, they were sort of a match made. In hell, because I don't know in which place these two people could be born. Now, after they got married, they decided to go from Hollywood to Las Vegas. And here in Las Vegas, they started running some other scams, and they were able to scam some investors, and when they had the money, they came back to Hollywood to run some other more sophisticated scams. But I have to remark that during their time in Las Vegas, Kris was out of the plan. Just remember that she is the daughter of Susan, and she was left out of the equation. So they were like, oh, is that your child? Yeah, no, she's not coming with us. So they went sort of in a like honeymoon, and over there, Kris decided that she missed her mom a lot. She was staying with a friend of Susan, so she went to Las Vegas, and they were like, oh, what are you doing here? But not like missing her, more like an inconvenience. In any case, Kris was staying with them, and something horrible happened to her by the hands of Tony that I don't feel very comfortable recalling, but you can sort of imagine what happened that day. And I just need to add that Susan didn't believe her own daughter. Just to put that out there. Once they got back to Hollywood, now let me paint you the following scenario. Imagine a Hollywood boulevard in the late 60s. Glamour and weird people on the streets handling pamphlets. Now, could you guess who were those weird people? Yeah, those were Susan and Tony handling pamphlets about the end of the world. Now, when they were there, they were able to meet a dealer, they were able to transform into sort of a Jesus freak. And now, he connected them to troubled kids who ran from home, and they started growing and growing. They needed a place to settle down and to start their own church. So after going from place to place, they eventually found a place in Sogos Desert. After that, they had to constantly come back to Hollywood to basically offer salvation to people and to offer them food and shelter and a purpose in life, because most of religion is just finding your own purpose. In any case, they were able to get a lot of members into their church. Now, does that sound bad? Not at all. I mean, two people trying to make a church to salvate people. However, Chris herself said that these two were only two scammers who reunited to create a non-profit organization, basically a church, just to run scams. In 1976, they moved to Arkansas, where they had a press, a school, a rehab center, and many other local businesses. But the one who was rampant, and the one that is known to today, was their workshop, where they made personalized denim jackets. Now, these denim jackets were tacky to say the least, but these were personalized, and to this day they are sort of a collector's piece. Now, someone from Refinery 29, named Risha, made an interview recalling the moments working in that workshop. But before telling you the side of his history, I just need to tell you a very interesting fact. During the height of their denim jackets, people like Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson wore them. And even Michael Jackson has a personalized leather jacket that was worn in the cover for his album Bad. And to this day, people like Miley Cyrus, Nicki Minaj had been photographed wearing those things, which, I mean, do we not know the history of these things? No? Because, I mean, I wouldn't wear something that had this immoral of an antecedent. In any case, Risha reclaimed working up to 14 hours a day in the workshop, and he recalled that kids were gluing the stones manually in the jackets. Now, rhinestones are sharp, so a lot of the kids cut their fingers, so pouring their own blood into the jackets. And that in itself is gross and immoral. But I mean, the jackets are still being sold to today. There's even someone who collects them and sells them on eBay. I mean, isn't that strange in itself? Now, this is from another article I was able to find on them, but basically some other workers claimed even more horrible conditions than the ones that Risha was experiencing at the workshop for the denim jackets. They had a lot of businesses, and as he was running a cult, he was not paying their members, because being in a cult is sort of like, okay, you are here and you are working for a greater purpose than your deserved salary. There were people who claimed that they were working 20 hours a day, that they were not allowed to flush the toilets in the communes, and that they were forced to scavenge for food in the dumpsters. And these were the conditions that were put against Tony Alamo. In 1992, it was ruled that all of his businesses, all of them, could no longer be non-profit. And even though he appealed the decision, he now basically had to pay taxes, which taxes play a very important part here, because it was for that reason that he was imprisoned the first time. But before going to the other section, that is his imprisonment, let me tell you a very interesting fact. He even had a nightclub where Dolly Parton performed, and a young Bill Clinton used to go. So okay, with that out of the way, now let's go with Susan. In 1992, Susan unfortunately passed away due to breast cancer, and Risha recalls that this was the pivotal moment when Tony lost his mind and he spiraled out of control. The first instance that was reclaimed is that Tony put out some followers of his church to look after the body of Susan for the day of her resurrection. As that didn't happen, she was later transferred to a mausoleum in a heart shape. But in 1991, his properties were raided because he owed $7.9 million in taxes. So this resulted in them raiding his properties, but guess what? Someone was missing. Do you know who is that someone who's missing? Yes, Susan was missing. And with Susan was missing, I mean her body was missing. So he was ordered by a judge to turn back the body. And he did return the body. And he was later sent to jail. In 1994, it's when he was sent to jail for 6 years to Texarkana for basically evading taxes, for exploiting people, and for not being a good person. But once he was out, it's when things definitely got immoral, weird, and gross. And let me read you a news report that I found from the New York Times. At its height, his ministry claimed thousands of members nationwide, drawn to Mr. Alamo's virulent anti-Catholicism and apocalyptic speech, in which he claimed that God had authorized polygamy, professed that gay people were the tools of Satan, and believed that girls were fit for marriage. Consent is poverty, he told the Associated Press in 28. On that same interview from Refinery 29, Risha stated that he recalled a moment when he was in the cold holding hands with a girl, and there was another boy in that equation, and all of them three were battered with a paddle, severely, to the point when one of them fainted, and his unconscious body was on the floor still being battered by the members of the commune. That's how strict they were with decency. In 1984, he married a Swedish woman named Birgitta, who she was not only bothered by him, but she was forced to go under the knife to resemble Susan, and she even recalled being obnubilated with substances. So obviously she left that marriage because it was a horrible situation for her, and in between 1986 and 1990 he married 4 more times. He himself, even knowing that he said it, he didn't believe in polygamy at first. He didn't believe in birth control methods, nor in abortion, but I mean he did believe in having one marriage after another, so I don't know which is worst, but I'm not the one who judge here. So when 28 came around, he was raided yet again, and this time they were in search of CP, which is basically child filmography, and you already know what type of filmography. So he was raided for this cause, and it resulted in them not finding what they wanted, but it resulted in some people blowing the whistle that in 1984 he was married with a 15-year-old, and this only led to more accusations about the things that he was doing in between those years where Susan was already gone. He was convicted after 5 more women testified against him, claiming that they were his secret wives that were married to him in secret ceremonies. Almost all of them were trafficked from Arkansas to the location where he was, so it was basically like child trafficking. And the judge Harry Barnes, when he was sentencing Tony Alamo, he looked at him and he said,
"One day, you will face the biggest judge of all.
so he expected that.
God, have mercy on your soul."
And after that, and his life sentence, he died at age 82, the 2nd of May of 2017. Now, this particular case was very strange to me because it is quite interesting to see how all of these cults were able to run all of their, not only scams, but how they were able to exploit people for so long. And an interesting thing that you need to know is that to this day, that cult still exists. I mean, they are still sort of a church, but in any case, it is very daunting for me knowing that we know the history behind it, what people were put through, and all of the things that went down with his sentence. People are still believers of the things that he professed. He even distributed records, he had his own network, he was doing his own sort of program, distributing his own music. I mean, all around it was a very particular tale, and I'm not entirely sure what happened here, but I'm actually impressed that these two people were able to make themselves millionaires out of doing things so immoral and so disgusting. But I mean, I have read somewhere that you will only get rich if you are like a horrible human being or something like that. In any case, I'm not putting this out just to, well, basically fulfill morbid curiosity. I'm putting this out more as a tool for people to identify how a cult operates, how a cult can look like, and how the members of the cult are usually the only ones who are getting rich. And all of the others are basically in misery. He even made his cult members made a vow of poverty, so they handed their gods to him. I mean, isn't that crazy overall? I mean, I don't know what sort of convincing powers he had, but yeah, this was a tale like no other. And I mean, they're already dead, so they cannot harm anybody anymore. So that's a positive. And I have never thought that I would say that it's a positive for someone to be out of this world, but I think this can be the exception. And Kris is in a better place now. She's not gone. She's still with us in Earth, but she's at a better place. Not with those monsters anymore, fortunately. So now, that's all of my input in this case, that's all of the history. As always, the links will be below, because remember that we don't spread misinformation. And yeah, that's it. No, that's not it, because remember that I can be your Fiverr editor, so link below as well. And as always, I will end this video in a high note.